Sabriel reached the third gate just ahead of the wave, gabbling a free magic spell as she ran, feeling it fume up and out of her mouth, filling her nostrils with acrid fumes. The spell parted the mists, and Sabriel stepped within, the wave breaking harmlessly around her, dumping its cargo of dead down into the waterfall below. Sabriel waited a moment more, for the path to appear, then passed on to the fourth precinct. This was a relatively easy area to traverse. The current was strong again, but predictable. There were few dead, because most were stunned and rushed through by the third precinct's wave. Sabriel walked quickly, using the strength of her will to suppress the leeching cold and the plucking hands of the current. She could feel her father's spirit now, close by, as if he were in one room of a large house and she in another, tracking him down by the slight sounds of habitation. He was either here in the fourth precinct, or past the fourth gate in the fifth precinct. She increased her pace a little again, eager to find him, talk with him, free him. She knew everything would be all right once father was freed. But he wasn't in the fourth precinct. Sabriel reached the fourth gate without feeling any intensification of his presence. This gate was another waterfall of sorts, but it wasn't cloaked in mist. It looked like the easy drop of water from a small weir, a matter of only 2 or 3 feet down. But Sabriel knew that if you approached the edge, there was more than enough force to drag the strongest spirit down. She halted well back and was about to launch into the spell that would conjure her path, when a niggling sensation at the back of her head made her stop and look around. The waterfall stretched as far as she could to see either side, and Sabriel knew that if she was foolish enough to try and walk its length, it would be an unending journey. Perhaps it eventually looped back on itself, but as there were no landmarks, stars, or anything else to fix one's position, you'd never know. No one ever walked the breadth of an inner precinct or gate. What would be the point? Everyone went into death or out of it, not sideways, save at the border with life, or walking along altered where you came out. But that was only useful for spirit forms or rare beings like the Mordicant, who took their physical shape with them. Nevertheless, Sabriel felt an urge to walk along next to the gate, to turn on her heel and follow the line of the waterfall. It was an unidentifiable urge, and that made her uneasy. There were other things in death than the dead, inexplicable beings of free magic, strange constructs and incomprehensible forces. This urge, this calling, might come from one of them. She hesitated, thinking about it, then pushed out into the water, heading out parallel to the waterfall. It might be some free magic summoning, or it might be some connection with her father's spirit. "They're coming down the east and west stairs, too," said Mogget. "More hands." "What about the south, where we came in?" asked Touchstone, looking nervously from side to side, ears straining to hear every sound, listening to the dead wading out into the reservoir to form up in their strange, regimented lines. "Not yet," replied Mogget. "That stair ends in sunlight, remember? They'd have to go through the park." "There can't be much sunlight," muttered Touchstone, looking at the light shafts. Some sunshine was coming through, heavily filtered by clouds, but it wasn't enough to cause the dead in the reservoir any distress or lift Touchstone's spirits. When do you think he will come?" asked Touchstone. Mogget didn't need to ask who he was. "Soon," replied the cat in a matter-of-fact tone. "I always said it was a trap." "So how do we get out of it?" asked Touchstone, trying to keep his voice steady. He was inwardly fighting a strong desire to leave the Diamond of Protection and run for the southern stair, splashing through the reservoir like a runaway horse, careless of the noise. But there was Sabriel, frosted over, immobile. "I'm not sure we can," said Mogget, with a sideways glance at the 2 ice-rimmed statues nearby. "It depends on Sabriel and her father. What can we do?" "Defend ourselves if we're attacked, I suppose," drawled Mogget, as if stating the obvious to a tiresome child. "Hope. Pray to the Charter that Caragor doesn't come before Sabriel returns." "What if he does?" asked Touchstone, staring wide-eyed out into the darkness. "What if he does?" But Mogget was silent. All Touchstone heard was the shuffling, wading, splashing of the dead, as they slowly drew closer, like starving rats creeping up to a sleeping drunk's dinner. Sabriel had no idea of how far she'd gone before she found him. That same niggling sensation prompted her to stop, to look out into the waterfall itself, and there he was. Abhorsen, father. Somehow imprisoned within the gate itself, so only his head was visible above the rush of water. "Father!" cried Sabriel, but she resisted the urge to rush forward. At first she thought he was unaware of her. Then a slight wink of one eye showed conscious perception. He winked again and moved his eyeballs to the right several times. Sabriel followed his gaze and saw something tall and shadowy thrust up through the waterfall, arms reaching up to pull itself out of the gate. She stepped forward, sword and bell at the ready, then hesitated. It was a dead humanoid, very similar in shape and size to the one who had brought the bells and sword to Wyverley College. She looked back at her father, and he winked again, the corner of his mouth curving up ever so slightly, almost a smile. She stepped back, still cautious. There was always the chance that the spirit chained in the waterfall was merely the mimic of her father, or, even if it was him, that he was under the sway of some power. The dead creature finally hauled itself out, muscles differently arranged to a human's visibly straining along the forearms. It stood on the rim for a moment, bulky head questing from side to side, then lumbered towards Sabriel with that familiar rolling gait. Several paces away from her, out of sword's reach, it stopped, and pointed at its mouth. Its jaw worked up and down, but no sound issued from its red and fleshy mouth. A black thread ran from its back, down into the rushing waters of the gate. Sabriel thought for a moment, then replaced Saraneth, one-handed, and drew Dirim. She cocked her wrists to ring the bell, hesitated. For it to sound Dirim would alert the dead all around, then let it fall. Dirim rang sweet and clear, several notes sounding from that one peal, mixing together like many conversations overheard in a crowd. Sabriel rang the bell again before the echoes died, in a series of slight wrist twitches, moving the sound out towards the dead creature, weaving into the echoes of the first peal. Sound seemed to envelop the monster, circling around its head and muted mouth. The echoes faded. Sabriel replaced Dirim quickly, before it could try and sound of its own accord, and drew Rana. The sleeper could quell a large number of dead at once, and she feared many would come to the sound of the bells. They would probably expect to find a foolish, half-trained necromancer, but even so, they would be dangerous. Rana twitched in her hand expectantly, like a child waking at her touch. The creature's mouth moved again, and now it had a tongue, a horrid, pulpy mess of white flesh that writhed like a slug. But it worked. The thing made several gurgling, swallowing sounds, and then it spoke with the voice of Abhorsen. "Sabriel, I both hoped and feared you would come." "Father," Sabriel began, looking at his trapped spirit rather than the creature. "Father." She broke down and started to cry. She had come all this way, through so many troubles, only to find him trapped beyond her ability to free him. She hadn't even known that it was possible to imprison someone within a gate. "Sabriel, hush, daughter. We have no time for tears. Where is your physical body?" "In the reservoir," sniffed Sabriel. "Next to yours, inside a diamond of protection." "And the dead? Caragor?" "There was no sign of them there. But Caragor is somewhere in life. I don't know where." "Yes, I knew he had emerged," muttered Abhorsen via the thing's mouth. "He will be near the reservoir, I fear. We must move quickly. Sabriel, do you remember how to ring 2 bells simultaneously? Masrael and Kibeth?" "2 bells?" asked Sabriel, puzzled. Waker and Walker at the same time? She had never even heard it was possible. Or had she? "Think," said Abhorsen's mouthpiece. "Remember, the Book of the Dead." Slowly it came back, pages floating down into conscious memory, like leaves from a shaken tree. The bells could be rung in pairs, or even greater combinations, if enough necromancers were gathered to wield the bells. But the risks were much greater. "Yes," said Sabriel slowly. "I remember. Masrael and Kibeth. Will they free you?" The answer was slow in coming. "Yes, for a time. Enough, I hope, to do what must be done. Quickly now." Sabriel nodded, trying not to think about what he had just said. Subconsciously, she had always been aware that Abhorsen's spirit had been too long from his body, and too deep in the realm of death. He could never truly live again. Consciously, she chose to barricade this knowledge from her mind. She sheathed her sword, replaced Rana, and drew Masrael and Kibeth. Danger bespells both, and more so in combination than alone. She stilled her mind, emptying herself of all thought and emotion, concentrating solely on the bells. Then she rang them. Mazrael she swung in a 3/4 circle above her head. Kibeth she swung in a reverse figure 8. Harsh alarm joined with dancing jig, merging into a discordant, grating but energetic tone. Sabriel found herself walking towards the waterfall, despite all her efforts to keep still. A force like the grip of a demented giant moved her legs, bent her knees, made her step forward. At the same time, her father was emerging from the waterfall of the 4th gate. His head was freed first, and he flexed his neck, then rolled his shoulders, raised his arms over his head, and stretched. But still, Sabriel stepped on, till she was only 2 paces from the rim, and could look down into the swirling waters, the sound of the bells filling her ears, forcing her onwards. Then Abhorsen was free, and he leapt forward, thrusting his hands into the bell mouths, gripping the clappers with his pallid hands, making them suddenly quiet. There was silence, and father and daughter embraced on the very brink of the 4th gate. "Well done," said Abhorsen, his voice deep and familiar, lending comfort and warmth like a favored childhood toy. Once trapped, it was all I could do to send the bells and sword. Now I'm afraid we must hurry, back to life, before Caragor can complete his plan. Give me Sereneth, for now. No, you keep the sword, and Rana, I think. Come on! He led the way back, walking swiftly. Sabriel followed at his heels, questions bursting up in her. She kept looking at him, looking at the familiar features, the way his hair was ragged at the back, the silver stubble just showing on his chin and sideburns. He wore the same sort of clothes as she did, complete with a surcoat of silver keys. He wasn't quite as tall as she remembered. "Father!" she exclaimed, trying to talk, keep up with him, and keep watch, all at the same time. "What is happening? What is Caragor's plan? I don't understand. Why wasn't I brought up here, so I would know things?" "Here?" asked Abhorsen without slowing. "In death?" "You know what I mean," protested Sabriel. "The Old Kingdom. Why did... I must be the only Abhorsen ever who doesn't have a clue about how everything works. Why? Why?" "There's no simple answer," replied Abhorsen over his shoulder. "But I sent you to Ancelsior for 2 main reasons. One was to keep you safe. I had already lost your mother, and the only way to keep you safe in the Old Kingdom was to keep you either with me or always at our house. Practically a prisoner. I couldn't keep you with me, because things were getting worse and worse since the death of the regent, 2 years before you were born. The second reason was because the Clare advised me to do so. They said we needed someone, or will need someone. They're not good with time. Who knows Ancelsior? I didn't know why then, but I suspect I do now." "Why?" asked Sabriel. "Caragor's body," replied Abhorsen, or Rogers, to give him his original name. "He could never be made truly dead because his body is preserved by free magic, somewhere in life. It's like an anchor that always brings him back. Every Abhorsen since the breaking of the great stones has been looking for that body. But none of us ever found it, including me, because we never suspected it is in Ancelsior. Obviously, somewhere close to the wall. The Clare will have located it by now, because Caragor must have gone to it when he emerged into life. Right, do you want to do the spell, or shall I?" They had reached the 3rd gate. He didn't wait for her answer, but immediately spoke the words. Sabriel felt strange hearing them, rather than speaking them, curiously distant, like a far-off observer. Steps rose before them, cutting through the waterfall in the mist. Abhorsen took them 2 at a time, showing surprising energy. Sabriel followed as best she could. She felt tiredness in her bones now, a weariness beyond exhausted muscles. "Ready to run?" asked Abhorsen. He took her elbow as they left the steps and went into the parted mists, a curiously formal gesture that reminded her of when she was a little girl, demanding to be properly escorted when they took a picnic basket out on one of her father's corporeal school visitations. They ran before the wave, with hands inside the bells, faster and faster, till Sabriel thought her legs would seize up and she'd tumble head over heels, around and around and around, finally clattering to a halt in a tangle of sword and bells. But she made it somehow, Abhorsen chanting the spell that would open the base of the 2nd gate, so they could ascend through the whirlpool. "As I was saying," Abhorsen continued, taking these steps 2 at a time as well, speaking swiftly as he climbed, "Caragor could never be properly dealt with till an Abhorsen found the body. All of us pushed him back at various times, as far back as the 7th gate, but that was merely postponing the problem. He grew stronger all the time, as lesser charter stones were broken and the kingdom deteriorated, and we grew weaker. Who's we? Asked Sabriel. All this information was coming too quickly, particularly when given at the run. The great charter bloodlines, replied Abhorsen, which to all intents and purposes means Abhorsens and the Clare, since the royal lion is all but extinct. And there is, of course, the relic of the wallmakers, a sort of construct left over after they put their powers in the wall and the great stones. He left the rim of the whirlpool and strode confidently out into the second precinct, Sabriel close at his heels. Unlike her earlier halting, probing advance, Abhorsen practically jogged along, obviously following a familiar route. How he could tell, without landmarks or any obvious signs, Sabriel had no idea. Perhaps, when she had spent 30-odd years traversing death, she would find it as easy. So, continued Abhorsen, we finally have the chance to finish Caragor once and for all. The Clare will direct you to his body, and you will destroy it, and then banish Caragor's spirit form, which will be severely weakened. After that, you can get the surviving royal prince out of his suspended state, and with the aid of the Wallmaker relic, repair the great charter stones. The surviving royal prince? Asked Sabriel, with a feeling of unlooked-for knowledge rising in her. He wasn't, suspended as a figurehead in Hullhallow, was he? In his spirit in death? A bastard son, actually, and possibly crazy, Abhorsen said, without really listening. But he has the blood. What? Oh, yes he is. You said... You mean... Yes, said Sabriel, unhappily. He calls himself Touchstone, and he's waiting in the reservoir, near the stones, with Mogget. Abhorsen paused for the first time, clearly taken aback. All our plans go astray, it seems, he said somberly, sighing. Caragor lured me to the reservoir to use my blood to break a great stone, but I managed to protect myself, so he contented himself with trapping me in death. He thought you would be lured to my body, and he could use your blood, but I was not trapped as securely as he thought, and planned a reverse. But now, if the prince is there, he has another source of blood to break the great charter. He's in the Diamond of Protection, Sabriel said, suddenly feeling afraid for Touchstone. That may not suffice, replied Abhorsen grimly. Caragor grows stronger every day he spends in life, taking the strength from living folk and feeding off the broken stones. He will soon be able to break even the strongest charter magic defenses. He may be strong enough now. But tell me of the prince's companion. Who is Mogget? Mogget? Repeated Sabriel, surprised again. But I met him at our house. He's a free magic something, wearing the shape of a white cat, with a red collar that carries a miniature Sereneth. Mogget, said Abhorsen, as if trying to get his mouth around an unpalatable morsel. That is the Wallmaker relic, or their last creation, or their child. No one knows, possibly not even him. I wonder why he took the shape of a cat. He was always a sort of albino dwarf boy to me, and he practically never left the house. I suppose he may be some sort of protection for the prince. We must hurry. I thought we were, snapped Sabriel, as he started off again. She didn't mean to be bad-tempered, but this was not her idea of a heartfelt reunion between father and daughter. He hardly seemed to notice her, except as a repository for numerous revelations and as an agent to deal with Caragor. Abhorsen suddenly stopped, and gathered her into a quick, one-armed embrace. His grip felt strong, but Sabriel felt another reality there, as if his arm was a shadow, temporarily born of light, but doomed to fade at nightfall. I have not been an ideal parent, I know, Abhorsen said quietly. None of us ever are. When we become the Abhorsen, we lose much else. Responsibility to many people rides roughshod over personal responsibilities. Difficulties and enemies crush out softness. Our horizons narrow. You are my daughter, and I have always loved you, but now I live again for only a short time. 100 heartbeats, no more, and I must win a battle against a terrible enemy. Our parts now, which perforce we must play, are not father and daughter, but one old Abhorsen, making way for the new. But behind this, there is always my love. 100 heartbeats, whispered Sabriel, tears falling down her face. She gently pushed herself out of his embrace, and they started forward together, towards the first gate, the first precinct, life, and then the reservoir.